listening to Pastor Jim Eschenbacher, pastor of the branch, as he continues to teach from the book of Acts. This week's message, entitled Christ Crucified, comes from chapter 18 of Acts, from July 27th, 2014. For more sermons, please visit us on Facebook or check out our YouTube channel, The Branch, Oregon.
God, which is the whole reason for coming here today. I thought about not preaching and I just couldn't do it. I just thought, are you kidding me? This is my friends, my people, the church. It's who I hang out with. And it's what I do is lead in the area of the Word. I want to do that, Lord. I want to do what I'm called to do. So then I get here and find out that they're trying to lock all the doors so people can't come to our church. What else can we do here, you know? God is reigning. He is going to get us through all this, and we're becoming stronger. Thank you for all your prayers and your comments. People send me email comments. Thank you for that. Thank you for anything. If you call me, thank you for that. I appreciate it. All right, we're going to be in Acts 18. So if you want to turn there, we're going to actually work our way through this kind of slowly. One more commercial. My thanks to Carla for last week. I understand she did a good job. In fact, several people told me I might want to be watching my backside. She said, as we know, Carla's a communicator. What I didn't know, and I listened to the sermon and I found out she can also stop it when she wants to. She was able to stay on task, and that's a hard thing for Carla. She gets on a tangent, and that tangent might go all the way to Seattle or someplace that we've been, and she did a good job last week. I listened to the sermon, and I kept thinking, all right, she's going to camp here for a while. She didn't camp. She just kept rolling right back to the Word. So God really is using her, and also she's my nurse, my friend, and everything else that I could want. But my wife, yeah. That's just in the mix, by the way. All right. In chapter 17, as she taught you, Paul found himself in Athens, and he had to speak to a bunch of philosophical, religious people. Mars Hill is what it's often called, the Sermon on Mars Hill. He spoke for a while, and they kind of accepted him. There's like, yeah, you know, what you're saying is kind of okay. Why don't you come back next week and tell us more? He didn't. Like, okay, you're not even getting this. I'm not going to waste my breath. First place he went to where he actually was received, and he walked out. Every place else he'd been chased out. This place he was received, but he walked out because he said, no, you're not getting it. It's not what this is about. I'm not preaching to excite you or make you glad about the latest thing. I'm just trying to tell you the truth. And that changes your heart. And your heart's not changing. You just like the fact that I'm talking about something that you haven't heard yet. So then he goes from there, and the first verse of 18 tells us, it says, after this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. Corinth is easier to say than Thessalonica. I heard Carla had a little trouble with that word. Anyway, Athens was not Paul's greatest experience. It seemed to be, as I mentioned, it seemed to be. The people received him. They didn't throw him out. They didn't try to kill him. It seemed like it was going well, but not in his heart and mind. They weren't changing to the gospel. They weren't adjusting to the gospel. They were just listening to words. So then he goes to Corinth. Now, reading verses 2 to 5. I'm going to read a little and talk a little, read a little, talk a little, read a little, talk a lot. And he found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. And he went to see them. And because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them and worked, for they were tent makers by trade. And he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and tried to persuade Jews and Greeks alike. So, Paul, when he went to Corinth, first thing he does is hook up with some fellow Jews who did the same line of work that he did. He made tents, and he made tents. You know, we sort of get this feeling about Paul that he was continually subjecting himself to adversity. No, he wasn't that kind of a guy. He didn't want adversity. He kept getting it, but he didn't want it. Here he has an opportunity to hang out with some fellow Christians who also understood Judaism, who also knew how to make tents, and he chose to stay with them, spend time with them. And as he was strengthened in that relationship, he had the courage and the strength to go into the synagogue again and preach. Do I sound stupid? Funny? Corny? Muffle. Okay. I have a silencer. So what I'm saying won't kill you. Or might kill you. I don't know. Anyway, Carla's supposed to keep me clued on how I'm doing. She doesn't know that, but... So, this whole thing I've just gone over, Paul not being successful in Athens, appearing successful, people liking what he had to say, but that's not success. And this first lesson of this teaching is that success is not our monitor of obedience. A lot of times we view success from the world's perspective. And the world's perspective would say, first of all, if you're trying to do a church like we are, you got to get a lot of people. Okay, that's success. Or two, you got to have a big band. Okay, that's success. Or three, your pastor needs to be healthy. Whatever. So there's all these different measurements of success that we come up with. And Paul didn't let any of those get in his path. He came to Corinth and he preached the word to whoever would listen. Came to a new city and started preaching. Paul was not interested in being successful. He was interested in doing what he was told to do, which is preach the gospel. Verse 6. When Silas and... Oh, wait a minute. Verse 6. Did I skip 5? Yeah, I'll just skip it. Verse 6. And when they opposed and reviled him, he shook out his garments and said to them, "Your blood be on your own heads. I am innocent. From now on I will go to the Gentiles." Now I wonder if Paul doubted his effectiveness. What do you think? Would you? If every time you went and spoke somewhere, they ended up resisting you or not liking you, they push unlike on your face page? I mean, honestly, what would you think if someone did that to you? Every single place you went. And Paul was sent out, remember, from Antioch. They laid hands on him and sent him out with prayer and prophecy. He had that to fall back to and go, okay, I remember why I'm here. And in fact, if you go all the way back to his initial calling when he was saved on the road to Damascus, chapter 9, every once in a while I have to take a rest and let my thoughts catch up with my mouth. I should do that more often, but anyway, I'm doing it now while I'm sick because I never know what my thoughts are going to come out with. So anyway, when we went back to that day, Paul was blind, sitting in the house, and a man came to him. The man's name was Ananias, and the man came to him and spoke to him and said, actually, this is what God said to the man. Where is it here? He said to him, he will preach the word, and I must show him what he will go through because of the word. So Paul had a directive. He knew that his purpose in what he was doing was to preach the word. That was his directive. So even though things weren't going well, he still preached. Now, how many of us are willing to do that? We go out, we witness to somebody, and that person doesn't respond favorably. Maybe they even respond unfavorably. Maybe they even call you a name you can't find in the Bible. Maybe they just don't like you anymore. How do you respond to that? Paul just kept, find me someone else. I'll share the gospel with someone else. I'll share the gospel with this group. I'll share the gospel with this group. I'll share the gospel again. I'll try it a different way. I'll do this. I'll do that. Not going to be stopped. Lesson number 2, Paul was not a quitter. Not going to shut the man up. In modern vernacular, the show must go on. He had to preach the gospel. He had to get the word out. Now that's how the church was started. A man who would not take circumstances for an answer. He wouldn't take success or lack of success for his answer. He took his commission from God as his reason for doing what he did. And so he preached the word because he was told, this is what you're going to do. You're going to preach the word. Now, as we read on in that same chapter, in the next verse, well, we just found out that he got shut down and he said, okay, I'm going to the Gentiles. Now, do you remember back earlier in the book of Acts when he went to the Gentiles? That didn't go well. The Gentiles loved him, but the Jews were really upset that he went to the Gentiles. So he's not exactly picking an easy path here. He's picking another path of problem, most likely. But he is not going to be silenced. He's not a quitter. So if you're witnessing to somebody, if you're trying to live as a light in someone's life, don't give up. Hang in there. Be light all the time. Whenever you have an opportunity to shine light in that life, shine light. Don't go, well, I flunked last week. I think I'm done. Can't do it. Just be like Paul. That's too bad. I think I'm going to talk to them. That's too bad. I think I'm going to talk to them. Just continue to be light, because that's what we've been commissioned to do, is be light. Now we're going to stop reading from Acts here and talk about Corinth, because the church in Corinth is one of the more interesting churches that Paul started. And one of the things that makes it interesting for me as a church planter is that his first letter talks a bit about the days of planting. He doesn't do that in very many of his letters. So we get to find out, well, what did he do? And this church that worked, how did this work? 1 Corinthians 1:17. I'm being 1 Corinthians a little bit, and in Acts a little bit as well. For Christ did not send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel, and not with words of eloquent wisdom, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power. Paul knew his mission. He was to preach the gospel. He understood that the power of the gospel was in the message, not in the delivery. Now that's kind of important right now, because presently, with the invention of computer graphics and instant video and all that, a lot of preachers use videos and graphics and that kind of thing to enhance the message of the Bible. It does make you more interested because it appeals to your emotions. But Paul said, I'm just staying away from all of that. It's not in the delivery. The message itself is the power of God unto salvation. Just the message. So that's not the only reason I don't use graphics. The other reason I don't use graphics is I don't know how. I'm sure I could learn it, though. You know, it's not that hard. I mean, maybe it is. I'll ask Michael. I think I could learn it, but I just don't want to. I want to trust, in my mind, I want to trust the gospel to go into our hearts and change us from within. Years ago, not that many, maybe 100 years ago, 50 years ago, something like that, sheeple would gather to intellectuals. Did you know that? It still goes on, but it was a really big deal back then. Oh, this guy has a PhD after his PhD, and he knows Greek words that you've never heard, and he's preaching this Sunday. Oh, I got to hear him. And people would gather to the intellectual. Well, the intellectual pursuit is also a mind pursuit, just like emotions pursue things on an emotional level. Intellectual pursues things on a mind level, on my ability to perceive and understand and grasp it. Not that any of that's bad. It's just that, look what Paul says. Lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power. What could possibly empty the cross of Christ from its power? I would say virtually nothing. The cross of Christ is the power of God unto salvation. But it doesn't get into our hearts and become a working part of us by hanging out in our intellect or our emotions. It must go deeper than that. And Paul said, all right, we're going deeper. I'm not going to do this. This is what he said to the Corinthians. This is what I preached when I was among you. Now, he also said, I did not come to baptize. Does that seem like a contradiction to the Great Commission? Yeah, it does. It's not. Because Jesus didn't say, every one of you must do every one of these things. He just said, you go and do these things. We're not called upon, we're not expected to be the full meal deal in God. We have been given assignments. We have been given what we do. Right? I study deceptive doctrines, and I study comparisons between doctrines a lot. I would not expect you all to do that. In fact, kind of rather you not. It's a real boring subject. But I do it because I want to make sure I'm aware of deceptive doctrine and that I steer us clear of that. That's kind of my role in our gathering here. You each have roles in your gathering here. There are members of this gathering church. I don't even think we have membership, do we? Okay. There are members of this church who aren't members that I think one of your primary roles is to give me a hug. Because I'm not a hugger. Not you, Randy. But honestly, I so appreciate that expression of love. And, you know, from someone who hugs everybody, including the lamppost, a hug is another hug. For me, it's like, oh, wow, that breaks through all my barriers. This is good. I like this. All my selfishness. So you see how we all do contribute to this bigger picture? Just because I study things doesn't make me special. I just do what I'm supposed to do. I'm doing that, what I'm called to do, what I'm supposed to do. So when God said of Jesus, he is God said of Jesus, Jesus said of Paul, he is a chosen vessel of mine, and I will show him the things he must suffer for my name's sake. I tried to quote that earlier, but I was on the wrong page. Paul learned about his commission from the revelation of the Lord, but he also learned from the experience of going. And I'll talk for just a minute about the experience of going. How many of you have ever noticed the futility of talking about doing something and never doing it? Kim, did you have long discussions before you went on your mission? Yeah. But did you learn everything that you were going to learn, or did you have to go on the mission to learn some of it? Yeah. Sometimes you just have to go. In fact, it's God's way. Jesus was talking to a group of potential disciples one day, and it's in Matthew 8, starting in verse 18. And they all gave excuses why they couldn't come right now. Oh, I must bury my father. Oh, I got to pick my tomatoes. Oh, I have to spank my youngest. Oh, I have to whatever. Something they have to do before they can follow Jesus. And Jesus rebuked them. And if you remember Jesus' own disciples, it says of them, they immediately left everything and followed him. That's how we go with God. That's when you hear God calling your name and you know that he's called you, you go. And I'm not talking about being reckless here or inconsiderate of people around you. I'm just talking about what sets your priorities. You just know, I got to go. I need to do what God has told me to do. I don't have all the details. Some of those details will come as I go. And that's the point of this thing with Paul. When he headed out on this first journey, see, this is his second journey. When he headed out on his first journey, he didn't know what to expect. So can you imagine how it felt to be rejected and even stoned to death in one town? And then received by Berea, and then Thessalonican Jews show up and stir up a ruckus against him again. You imagine how he felt about all that? Wait a minute, God, is this how this works? You send me out and I have just one problem after another. Is that how it works? He doesn't know yet. He's learning as he goes. But he is discovering that that is one of the reactions of people to the message of the gospel. They don't like it. They don't want to deal with it. So he's having to learn that. For those of you that are online, I'm looking at my notes right now. Too many Christians are waiting for some magical moment from God before they step out and make a change that they know they should make in their life. Or sometimes these are big decisions, like in Kim's case, well, let's go to the Ukraine and pastor or be missionaries to that area of the world. That's a big decision. And those big decisions should not be made without already having a habit of making the little decisions to support what God wants from you in your life. Who you're going to marry. You can't just run around living for the devil and then run to God and say, okay, God, help me pick a good man or a good woman here to marry. That doesn't work that way. Maybe it will, but that's not how you should approach God. Your approach is, I will respond properly and faithfully to God in the little things, and then when there's big decisions coming up, I'll have the same relationship with Him that I have now. And carry on. You're not going to get all your answers until you go. Paul preached the gospel. That's what he says. Preach the gospel, the message. What is the gospel? And this could be interactive. What do you think it is? Anybody? Don't be afraid. I'm not going to give you the right answer, because I'll tell you what Paul's answer was, but okay, you're afraid. Jeremy? Yeah. Yeah. That's the walnut with the shell on it. That's good. Anybody else? Shell, are you avoiding me? Yeah. Well, some people just give the sweet, just the meat out of the middle. Jesus died to save you. Jeremy gave, we're caught up in sin. We have no way out. That's the shell. That's the hard part. Hard to chew on that one. Hard to swallow that one. It's all true. Thank you, Jeremy. Here's what Paul said. Verse 18 of chapter 1, he said, "For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved is the power of God." So the word of the cross is God's power to those of us who are being saved. He starts his next chapter, chapter 2, verse 1. This is Corinthians, by the way. "For when I came to you, brothers, I did not come proclaiming the testimony of God with lofty speech or wisdom." There we have that again. I wasn't trying to impress you. I didn't put up a video. I didn't do any of that. I just came very simply. In fact, he goes on, "For I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and fear and much trembling. And my speech and my message were not in plausible words of wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power, that your faith might not rest in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God." When I was preparing this sermon, I read that and I told the Lord, I said, "Lord, I don't anticipate any plausible words of wisdom coming out of my mouth. So can you convict people by the demonstration of your Spirit in their hearts as your word comes forth?" That's what Paul chose as his gospel. This is the message that he would not be pushed off of. This is what happened to his heart after he tried to persuade the men of Athens. "Oh, I see that you're religious. Well, let me tell you about this one God, blah, blah." It wasn't working. Now he comes here and he says, "You know what? I decided to know nothing among you." Now, Paul knew a lot. He knew the Old Testament better than all of us collectively, probably, in this room. He knew a lot about the Bible. He knew a lot about God. He knew by this time a lot about Jesus. He chose to know nothing among them but Jesus crucified. The message of the cross was Paul's message. He preached about Jesus, specifically his death. Jesus' death marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. We've talked about this a number of times. I'll say it one more time. The old covenant, which was set up by God where man performed certain rituals and made certain sacrifices to please God, that old covenant was satisfied in Jesus' death. It was done. No longer necessary. New covenant was began, and the new covenant was, you shall be in relationship with Jesus, God's Son. And that relationship will guide your life. That's what happened on the cross. It's a place of transformation, total transformation. Old things become new. Everything about your life, technically, is new in Christ. Now, transformation is more than becoming a good person. Glad to hear that. Transformation is going from living a life that ends in death to living a life that ends in life. That's the transformation. Your very existence is being changed. You're not just becoming a gooder, there you are, Jeremy, person, a better person. That's the message of Paul's gospel. You must be transformed from one who tries to please God with your efforts to one who pleases God by loving Jesus, who already did everything that was necessary to please God. Let me say it again. I don't think I can. Not in the same order. You'll get confused as it comes out. Now, we talk a lot about relationship to Jesus here in this church. If I sound like a broken record, let me tell you why. Paul sounds like a broken record when it comes to this subject. He never lets up. It's about relationship. I keep noticing Jen Gill over here, and she's smiling every time I look at her. And Jen, our relationship is not built on our understanding of facts. We have a relationship with each other. We're friends. And I hesitate to use that word with God because we throw it around casually in some circles, and I don't like that. But really, He was willing to say it. Jesus was willing to say, I'm going to call you friends now, to His 11 disciples after Judas had left the room. So we can accept the fact that God is willing to enjoy that level of relationship with us. But it takes a change on our part. We have to let go of the old way of doing things, our old ways of doing things, acting good and acting right and doing certain rituals on Sunday morning or Thursday night or whenever we do our certain rituals. Make everything be about, I just want to be close to Jesus. And in the process of getting close to Jesus, you and I draw close to each other. This is how the great commandment gets fulfilled. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, if you're loving God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, you're going to be rubbing shoulders with people doing the same thing. And pretty soon you're going to put your arm around them. And you're going to go through this thing together. I wrote in my journal this morning, it was one of the more profound, simple things that I've written. Profoundly simple, I guess I would say. That if a 3-year-old, if you were standing near the rim of the Grand Canyon and a 3-year-old, came up to you and asked you if they could hold your hand, would you say no? Would you be too cool for that? Would you be too good for that? Would you be too important for that? No, you wouldn't. And that's how we are. We're just a bunch of 3-year-olds walking this road with God. And every once in a while someone bumps into a road sign or something they don't know what to do with. You got to reach out your hand and hang on to somebody else and say, can you help me with this one? Kind of like what you did, Heidi. People do that. We just let's don't pretend this is some sort of high religion here that we got going. Well, we can't pretend that. Some sort of important ritual. Our version of church, which includes preaching before we have our main song time, it's not the better way. I don't know if there's a better way. It's just the way that we have chosen to bring emphasis to the Word. And also, my own heart on this is that the Word goes in and begins to work in your heart, and then you want to express that in praise. You want to express that in song. That's all it is. It's not like, okay, I read a book and this is the better way to do it. God likes this better. No, none of that at all. It just works.